Everybody, thank you for joining us. We are just going to give it a minute or so for people to join before we officially start the webinar. So we're just going to we were just having a little chat about the absent Dave, who was meant to be here, who had a very interesting incident last night, which I'm sure he'll share with people about. But it was one of the few excuses I've heard for not coming on a webinar that I think is fully 100% justified. Would you agree, Dan?
I would. Yeah, I would.
Yes.
I would.
Yes.
I would.
Good. I think we've got several people in now. I think these are going to be the early attendees. So I think we are, in fact, ready to start. So let me welcome everybody to today's webinar: How to Ensure Your Low-Code Project Succeeds. We are lucky enough today to be joined by two experts. First of all, we have Dan Cooke, Managing Director at Procensol. Hello, Dan.
Hi, Pete. Great to be here. We're going to be giving you a few tips and tricks on how to ensure your low-code project succeeds, and I hope you enjoy it.
Yeah, I'm sure we will. I'm sure it's going to be fabulous. And we're also joined by Manish, who is Head of Development and Delivery at Procensol.
Hi, Pete. Hi, Dan. Hello, everyone. We have extensive experience in delivering the change that we all want to see. And it is powered up with the speed and agility that low-code provides. So thanks to low-code. And we are going to share some of the tips, as Dan mentioned earlier. So I'm looking forward to a very constructive conversation today.
As I think we all are. So just to let everyone else know, my name is Pete. I am here to facilitate. So I'm not necessarily a contributor. I'm here to make sure that Dan and Manish are concise, that we stick to time, and ultimately that you all leave this webinar richer for having attended. Before we begin in sort of earnest, I just want to touch on some housekeeping. Number one, we are recording the session, and we are going to make that recording available to all people who have signed up, so attendees and anyone who can't make it. Hello, those who are watching the recording. And we are also going to provide some very short notes for you as well. So you'll be given a simple overview afterwards. It's an engaging webinar. It's here for you to ask questions, dig in, walk away, making sure you've understood anything you need to know. So it's very interactive. And for that interactivity, we are using the chat function, not Q&A. The reason for this is the chat defaults to anonymous, i.e. only myself and the other panelists can see who's asked the question. So you can ask questions without worrying who else might see them. And to help facilitate the chat, we have the lovely Rebecca. Rebecca, hi, and thank you for joining us.
Hi, thanks for having me.
It's a pleasure. Actually, Rebecca, I believe, just to make sure everybody has found the chat, you have a question you want to ask.
I do. Very simple. Yes or no? Do you know what low code is? Pop it in the chat.
Really simple like that.
And while you're in there, what would you like to take from today's webinar?
Oh, that's a good question. Very good question. What would people like to take from today's webinar? We have a plan, but we can flex. The beauty of having experts like Dan and Manish is that if we need to go a little off piece to hit your spot, we can do so. So please let us know what you want to take from today's webinar. Whilst doing so, I will just quickly cover off what the agenda is that we had planned. First of all, we were going to cover off, what is low code? Let's not assume that everybody knows the same amount. We're going to cover off what low code is and how it differs from a bespoke or an off-the-shelf application. Draw the distinctions, walk away with a good idea, and then we're going to get into the question of the benefits. When should you and when shouldn't you engage in a low code project? Finally, we're going to come on to some common pitfalls. So Dan and Manish are going to share their hard-earned lessons and their battle scars with things they have come across that didn't go quite well and how to avoid them. So some simple tips to implement your first low-code project and make it successful. We are going to stop for Q&A halfway through and at the end, but more on that later. For now, Rebecca, do we have anything coming in on the chat?
We do. So a lot of people don't really know what low code is. So we're really starting from scratch.
Excellent. They're all in the right place, I think. Anybody said what they want to get from today's session?
Yeah, a lot of people are interested in, the benefits and the pitfalls and how to overcome them. So
okay, so We'll get through what is low code. I think that's something that we can do fast, and then we'll get into the benefits and the pitfalls, if that's where people want to get to. So low code, from what you've told me, Dan, has been around for a while. It's growing in popularity. I believe Gartner have recently said that it's reached the stage now where it's a genuine option for enterprise level applications, which sounds great. But for those of us that don't know what it is, can you give us a quick introduction? I particularly liked the house analogy that you used when you explained it to me.
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, look, using that house analogy, low code really fits into the ecosystem along with sort of two other approaches to software. So you've really got off-the-shelf software, often referred to as COTS or commercial off-the-shelf software. In terms of the house analogy, this is really, you go to your builder, he has one of 2 or 3 designs. You pick the design that you like the most and you come along and the house is built. Very little customization. You may be able to change the color of the walls, for example, but that's about it. The structure, the roof, the house, everything that comes with it. That's one package. It does a particular job, but you can't make changes. The other opposite end of that is really completely bespoke design. So in terms of software, this is more like Java or .NET implementations. So quite low level coding, and sort of using the house analogy, it's like hiring an architect, and then it's like hiring the architect to do the design, but then you've got to go and find the site works people to go and prepare the site to get the foundations in. You've got to coordinate with the utilities people to get the utilities in. You've got to find the builders, the frame makers for the house, all of the different trades and services that go along with it. You've really got to go and work with all of those to bring your design into reality. Obviously, one of the advantages of that is you get the design you want, but we've all seen the property shows, actually quite often you have to make a lot of compromises. There's cost overruns, there's tremendous complexity. So low code really fits halfway between those two analogies. It's like sort of turning up, you bought your site, your foundations are down, your utilities are in, your site work's done, the frames and the different options are ready to go. And you can really create the rooms of the house however you want. You can move those rooms around, you can make them bigger, smaller, you can play around with them a lot quicker and easier. And when you're doing all that, all the utilities are automatically rewired and automatically plumb back in as you're changing these rooms and evolving your design. Yet you still get that complete flexibility over what the house looks like, what the colors are, etc. So, in a technical term, the low code is very much a platform that takes away a lot of the low-level complexity. It also enables us to really use a smaller number of people to deliver the results. So you're not necessarily having to go and work with Java developers and front-end developers and database developers and infrastructure guys and all that sort of stuff as one project. We can wrap a lot of that into a smaller number of people. So we can achieve sort of 70% more velocity than traditional bespoke development, but with the flexibility of the bespoke development to deliver the business value and really hone in the design as you want it.
Yeah, and we're starting to touch on some of the benefits there, which we will come on to in more detail, everybody. But I think just to summarize there, Dan, so from the way you've described it, low code isn't really halfway between off the shelf and bespoke. I think some people would think modular it does feel like it's almost like a faster bespoke.
Yeah.
You just get into what you really want, which is the design of your application.
It's allowing you to focus a lot more on the business value and a lot less on the sort of technical infrastructure and plumbing with things like low-level security and scalability and performance, etc. A lot of that is encapsulated with the low-code platforms that we use, so that it's easy to deploy. The vast majority of what we deploy is in the cloud now as well. So we can stand up a low-code platform incredibly quickly and focus on delivering value to the business.
Seems pretty clear to me, but I have had the advantage of a few practice sessions on this webinar, Dan, to get it locked in. So, if anybody is attending and something doesn't quite make sense from what Dan said, or you just got a further question, please do use the chat. We will stop for Q&A fairly soon. drop the questions in as they occur to you, and we'll move through and then come back to them. Manish, let me come to you now. Dan's given a high level, almost business perspective on what low code is from a business user's perspective. How would you describe it from a developer's perspective? How would you, what are its advantages?
Sure, Pete. So from a developer's perspective, I think they need to be doing two things particularly well. There's a lot of other things that they would do, but they basically need to nail down your structural way of writing code. The way you follow a pattern or an industry-wide framework, you're probably going to write 1,000 lines of codes to get a piece working. That's the first and the foremost thing. The next bit is the logical analysis. So they need to have an insight of an overall picture. They want to see, or they need to find out where they can bring efficiency when they're designing a solution. Now, imagine if we can drastically bring down the effort and time which is needed on the first bit. That would mean I can now focus more on the logical side of the application. I can build more applications because low code is giving me that speed. So, say if I was building one application in 5 months, now I can probably go and build 4 or 5 applications. It's not only limited to building, but it also gives me that ability where I can respond to the changes, the feedback, and at the end of the day, produce something which makes more sense to the customer, which meets the expectation at the first place. I'll probably take it further. And then if we are looking from, say, a delivery perspective, I'll tie it back to the analogy that Dan was presenting. So if I have to go ahead and build an application, I particularly don't need people with different skill sets. I don't need a UI developer. I don't need a Java developer or a database developer. The same person can be cross-trained on a low-code platform, and he can efficiently go and get the entire thing done, probably at a faster speed as well. So it gives that flexibility when you're looking at the project management. So I don't have to go ahead and be worried about the dependent items. I don't have to line things at the right time, because the same person can just switch his chair. He can say, okay, I'm building an interface now. The next moment I'm going ahead making sure that the information is going into the database. I'm pulling all the information out, presenting that report as it is needed. So it gives you that power where you are not dependent or reliant on multiple skills around you, gives you a quick turnaround on the project management side as well. The next bit is from a developer's perspective. It's different to the standard way of writing an application. So as I said initially, I'm not going to write, say, 1,000 lines of code. So what am I basically going to do? So it's very similar to drawing your process flow on Visio. So when you're working on a low-code platform, you're basically going to deal with, say, some paletted controls. For example, how do you want to send an email? Or how do you want to interact with your database? So you start to drag, drop, click, and configure those particular blocks that then gives you the entire workflow. Now, once you have that workflow, the beauty of low-code platform is you can actually see them running. So you can see how a particular instance from that workflow operated, which path it took, where it is currently. So you can see the current step. You can see what would have happened if this was, taking another way. So that gives you that visibility as well into your workflow and processes, gives you that power. You can probably draw some meaningful insights from it. So once you have seen how your processes are working and whatnot, you can find out, hey, this is the bottleneck. I see most of my processes flow very well until 5th step, but the 6th step is what is taking a lot of time. So without spending a lot of time and effort, you can find out where the bottleneck is. You can try and target those steps to bring in efficiency. With low code, it's not just building the application. It gives you the ability of to go ahead and use some cutting edge technologies, for example, machine learning, artificial intelligence, and robotics. So it gives you that entire bundle where you can go ahead and build an application in a smart manner.
Yeah, to build an application with that kind of range of technology in it, I can almost envision the team you would need, and there's a lot of very disparate skills, which I
Absolutely.
think would be hard to assemble. So, if I can summarize what I think you've said there, Manish, it's essentially in traditional bespoke development, the kind of people who are implementing the system, 80% of their mindset, their time, the things they dwell upon is going to be code, structured code, how to assemble using the technologies they've got. I mean, 20% is going to be about the business. What are they trying to achieve? Does it make logical sense? Will it plug together later on? Low code really does seem to shift that balance almost towards 50-50, maybe even more in favor of what's the business want to try and do? Right, let me make that work, and I can just trust that the system will come together. Is that kind of a fair summarization?
That's very fair. I'll probably add that, it's now at that stage where it is going beyond 50-50. It's probably 70-30 at this point.
Okay,
And
brilliant.
with the low code platforms, it's not only us developing the application faster, it's the platform itself, which is, going through that change. So expect the platform to be mature every 3 months or every 4 months. You will have a release on the platform of the low code application development platform itself. So if we are talking about 70-30 now, maybe in a couple of years will be around 80-20.
Okay, brilliant. That would be great, I think, for those of us who've worked on projects before. If we
I
can
think
move to that balance.
just a quick one on that one as well, around the people side of it. I think, when you reduce the number of people in the team, and you have a lot more sort of multi-skilled people, in your team in conjunction with the low-code platform, it means what we see is actually we're quite often working alongside the business. So you have people configuring on the platform working next to subject matter experts from the business. And when you combine that with low code and you combine that with agile methodologies, we're implementing quickly, we're getting that constant feedback coming through, and it just helps to kind of reduce that miscommunication of what the business is really looking for. And sometimes, especially at the start of projects, we tend to see the business don't know necessarily all of the things that they can do on a low-code platform. And as they start to see how we're assembling things and present options to them, it changes their thinking about how they want to address a particular problem. And because of that nature of working very closely with them, then we really get to see those advantages and those benefits very quickly.
Yeah, I mean, empowerment is something that I know we're going to come on to when we get into the advantages in detail. But I think I can speak for a lot of people who've been involved in IT projects, watching the business analyst write down what he thinks you said, handing it to a systems analyst who then designs something that he thinks the business analyst said you wanted, and then the developers build something loosely related, and what comes back is not quite what you asked for or is a country mile away. That's much less likely to happen. That's what we're essentially saying there. Yeah, wonderful. Okay, well, let's move on. I think we have covered quite nicely what low code is, but I have noticed that there are quite a few chat questions. So, Rebecca, is there anything pressing that we want to put to Manish or Dan?
Sure. I guess while we're talking about people, one of the questions that came up is the impact of low code for full-time coders and or configuration engineers. What's the impact for them?
Okay. Who's this best to go to, Manish or Dan? I'm going to go with Manish.
So this is more about the full-time developers, isn't it, Rebecca?
Yeah, that's what
So I'll assume that it's only going to enable you to do what you do best. I'll probably go back to what I was talking about earlier, that as a developer, you need to have few things. And if we can reduce the repetitive, mundane task, we are just asking you not to go ahead and reinvent the wheel every time you have to design an application, but leverage from the technology, leverage from what we have done earlier, so that you can go ahead and do the designs properly. And again, low code is very powerful. It gives you that speed, but it doesn't mean that you don't have to go and follow the standards or best practices. You're still looking at producing an application which is of production grade, which can scale. And business and processes, they need to be changed or updated, given a new refresh of the life. So I'm definitely going to say that it's not taking your jobs away or slowing you down. It is only going to enable you to do what you do best.
It's funny, actually, we were talking about this, really, weren't we, just before the webinar started, about when does a developer become truly valuable to a business? And it was after they've mastered the language, 3-4 years, and they can
Absolutely.
start to understand the business value, what they're trying to achieve and what the business wants. And actually what low code does is it skips that first stage, or at least shrinks it down quite a lot, and gets you to that business value much faster.
And I think another point is it's low code is not no code. So you still got that ability to configure and effectively write code to achieve what you want. So those kind of skill sets are still very, very much in demand, but obviously it allows you to do a lot more a lot quicker.
Okay, yeah, no, I agree. Well, we will stop for questions properly after this next section on the advantages. So please do keep them coming in. For now, let's get into the advantages. I'm going to start with Manish this time. So Manish, what would you say are the two biggest benefits from a development perspective of low code?
Oh, first and foremost, the speed. That's something everyone wants, right? So you don't want to be sitting there building an application, say, for months or years, and that's something low code would help you to do. When we are looking at building something on low code, we usually tend to talk about, we are looking at these many days or maybe a couple of weeks. Rarely happens that for building something you're looking at months or years. So that's the first thing. Second thing I would say, it gives you that clarity, it gives you that visibility. So for example, if I'm a developer and if I'm building a solution, at no point I would have the liberty to take 1,000 lines of code and present it to the business and say, do I meet your expectation? But on the same side, if I'm doing it on a low code platform, I can probably take 2 days or 3 days, just build a very high level process, the workflow, and then I can go back to the business or the customers, whoever are there in the workshop, and I can say, hey, from what I understood from you yesterday, this is how I see your business process flowing through. And that kind of cuts that entire cycle. We are not waiting for actually presenting something or building an application and then going back. It is, we talk, we do it, and we come back to you, we show it to you, we take the feedback. So reduces that cycle, gives us the visibility, and probably sooner rather than later, the business and the developers or the people who are configuring the application, they start talking in the same language. So
I can see that being a big efficiency. The gap between IT and business traditionally has been one of the great cripplers of IT projects, hasn't it? Where we said this, we heard this. Goes away quite quickly with low code. Is that what you're saying, Manish?
Absolutely, because it's not only you said this, we heard this, but it is also, we heard this, but we are coming back to you after 1 year, and this is what we have implemented.
Of course, so, to go back to the house analogy, you don't actually see a building that you would you don't see a room you would recognize as a place a person would sit and watch television for 12 months. Yes. What you're saying with low code is that within 3 weeks, you wouldn't have a house, you would just have a living room that you could take someone in and say, do you want the window there or do you want it there? Where do you want the TV? Where do you want the electrical points? And then another week later, they'd come back and you would have incorporated the changes they wanted.
I'll say that's very well summarized, Pete. It makes you work in the real agile fashion, I would say.
Yeah, and I think sort of the point you've raised as well in the past, Manish, having things like process flows. I mean, they're workflows, they're just maps that get executed. That in itself provides quite a common language that a vast array of different people from the business all the way through to the configurators can understand and understand very quickly. When we're configuring the platforms we work on, we look at it and say, if I can't get a pretty high level understanding from what that process is doing in 15 seconds or less, then it needs to be reworked to make it more obvious. So being able to come in and take a look at that is quite a powerful tool. especially when you compare that to sort of reams of lines of code that you have to be a specialist to understand. And then the second point is that ability to do that sort of visual drag drop when you're designing interfaces. And a lot of the time when you're in a workshop, you can be creating screens, creating reports while the business users are in the room, and sort of mocking them up and doing those sort of prototypes then and there, which again cuts that cycle time down.
Sounds like some great advantages. Speed, business are much more intimately involved in what's actually developed and deployed, and flexibility to change, reflecting their growing understanding of what the system can do. I know that when I have been involved in projects, it's frustrating because at the very end, you finally understand what you could have done, but it's too late. Sounds like that, again, doesn't exist with low code. Let's move on from this slightly, Dan, and let's look at it from a different angle about the benefits. When should you lose low code? When is it the best fit solution?
Look, I mean, for us, when we're looking at projects that we do, low code is best used when effectively you need a bespoke solution. There isn't something off the shelf that meets exactly what you want. We typically tend to find that the more complex something is, so whether that be complex business process or a series of business processes, whether that's complex and dynamic case management, for example, that's where low code really shines. You get the most benefit out of that because by being able to take the approaches we've sort of discussed, already in the webinar, we can really reduce that life cycle down. So, using low code helps to kind of de-risk that complexity, somewhat. So that's typically where we find low code is a best fit, when you need something that is bespoke and is on the more complex side of projects. So yeah, that's probably the best place for us.
Yeah, and I think from what I know of the client base that you have, that's commonly found so far in the public sector, where each department is the one department in the country that does that particular type of case management and that kind of work. There are no off-the-shelf packages that really suit their needs.
Yeah,
especially.
We've worked with sort of government departments in that space who have stood up, world first acts, and obviously they need systems to support the implementation of those acts. When you're doing something for the first time in the world, there is nothing that's going to be out there that you can just pick off the shelf.
Yeah, and the other one though, I think that's interesting that you've told me about in the past is that I think you've done a lot with insurance as well, haven't you?
Yeah.
And insurance strikes people as surely that is suited to sort of off the shelf. It's insurers do the same thing, but of course insurers can create value by tweaking the way they do that one thing, and that's where again low code comes in with its advantages, if I understand correctly. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we see in the insurance space that quite often people will take sort of off-the-shelf products and they'll then spend a lot of time and money customizing them, and that then typically leads to upgrade problems and other issues later on down the line. So the cost of ownership goes up quite significantly. I think low code in insurance and low code across a number of different industries, because you can stand up solutions very quickly, typically within 8 weeks or less for a sort of small to medium-sized solution. It really allows you to experiment. It allows you to, for example, bring new products to market, new ways to interact with your client, and the ability to really test, experiment, and innovate is significantly enhanced by using a low-code platform because of the speed.
Yes, so I think we have touched nicely on the advantages, and now is probably a good time to go to questions. So Rebecca, I put you on mute because there's a little bit of feedback. So if you could come off, and then I will ask you what questions have we had coming in. I can see there is a lot of activity in the chat.
There is. So I guess we'll continue on the insurance path. We did have a question come up about insurance. So a lot of insurance companies are recruiting heavily for developers and BAs to manage legacy systems. How would low code impact the size of an IT house and in an agile environment? So does it reduce time from concept to delivery?
Yeah,
Sounds like a question for Dan.
Yeah, I can pick that one up. So, I mean, typically, yes. I mean, we find that, I mean, the sort of latest metrics out around this is using a low-code platform. A developer or a configurator can achieve 70% more than they would using traditional methods. So, if you extrapolate that out, it kind of gives you a level of efficiency that you're not going to get when you're trying to modify off-the-shelf software. Using more traditional, coding practices such as Java, .NET, etc. So, short answer is yes. You can do more with fewer people, and because the low-code platforms are sort of abstracting out the complexities, then you don't need quite so many experts in so many areas of the technology stack.
Sounds like a big set of advantages. So thank you to whoever asked that question. Hopefully it's answered it for you. If not, please do let Rebecca know. Rebecca, what's your next question that we've got coming in?
Sure. So there's what's an example of a key constraint that means low code's not suitable for a particular solution? I know you touched on that slightly, talking about COTS, the custom off the shelf, but I guess, if you could expand on that.
Yeah, I mean, this is something we were sort of coming to, I think, as well. In sometimes low code isn't necessarily the best solution for your problem. There are times if you have a very standard process or a standard requirement for a solution, it isn't necessarily the best thing to go down a low code route, because you're not necessarily going to get the benefits, because there's not a huge amount of bespoke nature to what you're doing. So, for example, I wouldn't go and build an accounting package that's a default package like Xero on a low-code platform, because I can buy Xero for $20 a user per month. It works in a standard way, and I wouldn't go and try and reinvent the wheel with that. Same with some of the other more common processes like HR processes. Quite a few companies, their HR processes are broadly standard. There are obviously exceptions to that. Where commercial off-the-shelf software is available and meets your needs, you'll quite often find that will be a cheaper alternative, and will give you what you need.
Okay, yeah. So hopefully that's answered the question from the person who asked it. Thank you for asking it. Appreciate it. Rebecca, if not, please let Rebecca know and we will come back to it. That's absolutely fine. We've got a few minutes now. Rebecca, are there any other questions in the meantime?
I guess we've talked a lot about IT teams in the companies, and someone said, can companies do it themselves, or do they need a company like Procensol?
I'm happy to.
Yes, absolutely. Sorry, no.
I mean, the short answer is whenever we're working on projects with our customers, we will always endeavour to cross-train people within the organisation and upskill them. If the concept of what we call a citizen developer in the low-code space, makes it a lot more accessible to a slightly tech-savvy business user than it ever has been. But by the same token, that doesn't mean they shouldn't have any guidance. It depends on the nature of what they're trying to implement. I wouldn't necessarily say, there you go, business, there's a low-code platform, you don't need any help with it, you can go and build enterprise applications. That's certainly not the case. If you've got your own internal IT department, then with some cross-training and some experience on the low-code platforms, then absolutely they can start to pick that up and run with it. And that's what we advocate whenever we're working with clients to deliver their first or second, third projects. At the same time, we're upskilling their internal team, whether that be on the business side or the IT side, or sometimes both, so that they can actually take ownership of the platform, be able to change their applications quickly and efficiently. And then we come in and just give them expert advice when they need it, whether that be architectural advice or solving a particularly knotty problem that they haven't come across before, where we can bring our global expertise to that. So that's typically the way it works. But again, it depends on the size of the application that you're wanting to build.
Okay, that was an excellent question, whoever asked it. Thank you. Hopefully, again, Dan has answered the question for you. I'm also very grateful, because citizen developer is something we are going to talk about in a few minutes. So you've helped save a few seconds there because Dan's explained it already. Rebecca, do we have any more questions that are pressing or really suitable now, or shall we move on?
I've got one more actually that I think would be really handy, and it's what sort of developer skills do you need? Like what kind of people do you look to hire when we're talking about low code?
This is a good question. Manish, can I send this one to you? Because obviously it's your team that you try and hire into. So what do you look for in people that are suitable for low code?
Yeah, sure thing. So as we were saying, if you're working on low code, we don't need someone who is cross-skilled on a myriad different technologies. What we basically look for is someone who has interest in IT, someone who can probably go ahead, draw some workflows, and has that logical thinking. More important thing for us when we are looking at someone who is a best fit for working on a low code platform is that they should have that hunger, that they want to do some little bit of consulting, like going ahead, talking to the business, finding what is it that you're truly trying to solve here, understanding the real problem, having a bigger vision altogether is something we would probably look for into a resource.
I think that's a fair call, Manish. I mean, we recruit and train a number of graduates locally, in Australia and in the UK. So, when we're looking, definitely someone who's got the passion for it, that's essential. But also from a sort of, they don't always come from a sort of STEM background. We take on people with sort of history degrees and sometimes arts degrees, but they've got a passion for technology. And the other thing, as you alluded to there as well, I think is looking for someone who can communicate with other people well. That's a bit of a little bit of a difference, especially when we look at the pure play sort of deeply technical people in the community. Sometimes they're not always the best at speaking to the business in a language that they can understand. So, having someone who can sort of bridge that gap a bit, that's particularly what we're interested in, because a lot of the time we're working very closely with the business and you need to be able to communicate with them in a language they understand.
So it sounds like basically it's a mix of the hard and the soft skills, someone who's got a logical mind. The technology I always think is a great litmus test is if you give them Microsoft Excel, if they get excited about all the things they can do, you're probably onto a winner. If they freak out, it's maybe best to find them a different project to get involved in. Is that a fair one? That's
probably a fair call. And equally, I would say when we take people on from a more traditional coding background, who've got quite extensive Java or .NET development, we probably have about a 50% success ratio. You either get people who come in and go, this is fantastic, I don't have to do all of this sort of low-level coding that's just, it takes time away from what I enjoy, which is interacting with the business and delivering that value. And then the other 50% go, I feel slightly constrained by not being able to write the exact line of code that I want at a really low level. And I feel like I'm losing some freedoms as part of this. And they tend to sort of come in and go, yeah, that's not for me, and go back to that sort of bespoke development side.
Interesting. Very interesting. So I think lots to talk about there.
That's where I would say attitude is the key. We need to find the person who has the right attitude towards, what you are bringing in and what kind of aspirations you have.
Yeah, hire for attitude, train for skills. I've always liked that one. Right, let's call an end to Q&A now, because I'm conscious of time and we do want to get into the pitfalls that can hit a low-code project, which you guys have done a lot of them. You've got some battle scars. Let's see if you can share some war stories and help people avoid falling into these traps. And thus, when they do come to have their first low-code project, which hopefully this will inspire them to do, it's much more likely to be a success. So, Dan, what would you say is one of the most tempting or likely pitfalls that people will fall into with a low-code project?
For me, it's a bit of a classic one, and that's reporting. It sounds like a bit of an odd one, but I've seen so many times when people, like, they get a shiny new low-code platform, they're so focused on getting data into the platform and how they're going to get it in and getting the apps built really quickly and having them automatically deploy on mobile and all this kind of stuff, that they forget to take into account what they actually want to get out from the platform. And I think the same could be said of across the board in IT. It's not specifically a low code problem, but obviously with low code, you will experience it a lot quicker. And that is, you need to look at what are the reporting requirements? What are the outputs from the system you actually need to get? What do the management team want to see on their MI dashboards? What do the regulators need in terms of data coming out of a system in order to satisfy their requirements? And then really taking that at the start of the project and feeding that into the design and architecture of your applications, so that you can make sure you actually are able to meet those requirements without having to go back and rethread, through and say, right, we need to capture these extra 5 or 6 pieces of information that we didn't know about at the start of the project because we've left reporting to the end, and we've suddenly got to the end and go, oh well, we need all this in this particular report to meet this regulatory requirement or this management requirement. And then the team has to go back and rework and add extra fields in to capture that data. So that's where you can trip up there and potentially lose some of the efficiency that you'll gain because of having to rework that through. So don't forget to take reporting into account when you're designing how you're going to build your application.
Now that's a very neat sentence which hides a lot of complexity, doesn't it?
Yeah.
The way you actually put reporting and data at the heart of a project. We prepared this webinar to a degree. We had some pre-sessions, and data came up quite a lot, quite often. And we did start floating the idea that we could break it out into its own roundtable conversation where
yeah, absolutely.
Be more engaged.
Yeah, we'd love to do that on a potential upcoming webinar. It'd be great to get some feedback on that. I mean, the platforms that we work with, we can get into a whole load of detail because they can really bring data up from legacy systems. They can bring data in from multiple sources into what we call a single pane of glass, like a dashboard where you've got data coming in real time from all these different sources. So there's the data side of a project is really critical and probably deserves its own webinar.
Yeah, well, it's in fact what we were suggesting was a roundtable, so actually maybe a little bit more intimate, a bit more open conversation, interactive. We have had a few people show some interest in that before from what you've told me, but if anybody on the webinar would like to just know a little bit more about what's being proposed there with a roundtable on data and reporting specifically, just pop a 7 in the chat, please, and we'll just get in touch and just let you know exactly in more detail what we're thinking of doing, and then we can start getting some dates together if there's enough interest. But Dan, for those that are here and want it, can you tell me what's the one practical tip you would give someone that they could implement before they started that would avoid issues with data at the end?
It really is, make sure you consider that and take the time to do the design up front with regards to the data. There's a lot of temptation to get going and really run before you've taken that step back to look at the bigger picture. And it's something that we always do is you don't have to spend a vast quantity of time doing that design. You can do it fairly quickly, but you need to take into account all of the data points you're coming into the system, all the data points you want to get out, to make sure that when you're laying down that sort of blueprint for the next 8 weeks of development to deliver the app, that everyone's aware of what we need to put in and put out of the system and move that forward. Speed isn't an excuse to sacrifice proper design.
Yeah, I agree. And it's all the more important, actually, when you can move fast. Move fast and break things is a great concept until you've ended up with the broken stuff. So move fast and build it properly. Even better.
Move fast.
Yes. And keep an eye out for people who want just data analysis, not just reports. I know that you've mentioned that to me before as well. But anyway, getting into multiple tips there. So let's move on from yours, Dan. Manish, from a dev perspective, what would you say the biggest pitfall that you've come across is with low code?
Yeah, I think we slightly touched on this point earlier. With low code gaining traction, there is a trend where citizen developers are coming on board as well, which is good because that's the meaning of low code, right? You can learn something quickly, and it gives you that agility and flexibility. Uh, but that's a common pitfall as well. Just because you can learn something and you can start doing something, it doesn't actually mean that aim at running when you're finding your feet on the ground. So there is a approach, a certain specific way we usually go with the customers. So whether it be a citizen developer, someone from the business who has that great intel about the business, who knows exactly how the business works, or it is someone from their IT team who has recently been cross-trained on a low-code platform. The way we approach it is we would work with you maybe on a small project to begin with. It may be a couple of projects, couple of weeks to months, and that is where, while we are working together, we coach them, we tell them what is the industry-wide best practices, what are the standards that you need to follow, because nevertheless, you are building an application, but that is supposed to go to the production. So we need to think from the perspective that, is it going to be the right fit in your ecosystem? Is it going to scale? Can it take all the load that you want it to take? Or is it the best way to do it? Because there are different ways of doing the same thing. And that's where we have seen historically that we have added value to the customers as well, or given that insight even to the technical people who are coming on board, because we have been in this low code journey for quite a long period now. So definitely there are tips and tricks that we can share with them when we are working together.
Okay, brilliant. And is there one tip, one takeaway for anybody that if they don't work with you going forwards, they still end up a little bit better off with a low code platform that they should do?
Oh yeah, definitely. So there's another one that just comes to my mind on this one. The other thing that we see is, low code gives you that ability where you can go ahead and start making changes, producing them and pushing them, say, to the higher environment very quickly. So people usually take that approach where they say, okay, let me put down multiple teams so that they can produce multiple applications. Where we have seen them going ahead is they work very different. Like they completely operate in silo. There is not enough communication or conversation, and they end up building applications which don't fit together, or the maintenance becomes, say, a nightmare, because now when you're looking at an application, and if you're looking at even a small change, you have to basically go ahead and make that change and retrofit it at different applications and make sure that nothing is going to fall apart. So one tip on that front would be, never underestimate your design. That's something Dan was mentioning earlier as well. So design well in advance, put some sound architecture, and have some governance so that you ensure that whatever is going into your production system or whatever is finding its way into the bigger ecosystem of the application is a right fit.
Yeah. So it's, as you say, great power, great responsibility, but rather than blind trust, a gateway check, which means that if someone has gone a little bit off-piste, it doesn't become embedded into the system. There's still a chance to drag it out. Okay, I like that tip. That's very good. And it actually does move me nicely onto what I know is the next subject, really, because governance and change you were talking about there, and change management is another big thing that will help with, has been known to undermine a low-code project. Dan, can you talk to us a little bit about this?
Yeah, I mean, I think we see across the board, whenever we're coming into an organization to start with, you really need to step back and look at their appetite for change, and look at how widely that appetite exists. Change management in any project, but especially in low code, because of the speed of which we can make change and the regularity, the cadence of that change is frequent. You need to make sure that the user community that's going to be using that application is ready for that. Quite often we're walking into places where the system hasn't fundamentally changed for 10 or 15 years. And then when you start talking about, okay, well, we can start to fundamentally change your system in as little as 8 weeks. Oh, and by the way, we're going to be making small incremental changes to the system every 2 weeks after that. If it's not managed in the right way, then rather than it becoming a positive thing where the users really feel that they own the change and they can, feedback on the changes that we're making to, suggest other things that can be done. So rather than having a feeling of ownership, that they can guide the direction of the application and help us to make decisions around where bottlenecks are and what's important to them, they resist the change. They get change fatigue. So that rather than embracing it, they start to put up barriers and say, oh, we don't want the change as quickly as this, or we're not ready for the change. I'm used to, I've done what I've done for the last 20 years in a certain way. I really don't want to change the way we're doing it because that doesn't work for me. And, so consequently, certainly where you've got a higher number of users, especially when they're geographically diverse as well, getting change management in and change management expertise in early in bigger programs of work like that is critical. But even in smaller projects, you still need to look at the type of people who are going to be receiving and using the application and work with them to really get their mindset ready for the fairly frequent change that can result from the use of using low code and all the benefits that comes with it.
Okay, so if I pushed you for one single tip, what would you say that someone should do to try and avoid this pitfall?
Assess the change readiness, and if needs be, get a change manager in early. Don't get them in late, because by that point the ship has probably already sailed.
Yep, I like that. That's nice, clear, and easy to do. Okay, so 3 tips to make it work if you do go into your low-code projects. 1, reporting and data requirements front and center before you start developing every sprint. I like that one. Gateway any development before it reaches the wider ecosystem to make sure that people are adhering to a wider strategy, not just operating in silos. Push it back if they break the rules, and make sure you're running at the speed your team can handle change. So understand their capacity before you get going, and if needs be, get a change manager in. I think those are 3 very good tips, all very practical. Thank you, gentlemen. And we are nearing the end of the webinar now. So we are going to do an extended Q&A. So if you have asked questions, the plan is to hang on for another 5-10 minutes afterwards, if needs be, to make sure every question is answered. But if you are someone who does need to get away, before the deadline, let us know and we'll bring your question forward. Let Rebecca know and she'll bring your question forwards. Let's do a roundup. Dan, can you summarize, on the 3 topics that we covered off, what this webinar has covered for people?
Yes, I mean, the low-code projects generally easier to implement, they're faster, and they're cheaper than bespoke alternatives, while offering the flexibility of a bespoke design. Like any IT project, they can be unsuccessful if they're not planned and implemented properly. You've got that ability to really scale up quickly to meet the needs of an organization. But obviously with that, there comes the inherent risks we've talked about. So a few tips around that, like we said, get your reporting requirements in, get your data requirements in early, because that quite often defines your underlying sort of data architecture and the requirements there. Make sure you've got gateway checks in place to make sure anything that hits production is of appropriate design, quality, and isn't operating in a siloed manner away from everything else on the platform. Else you start to lose those advantages of being able to report centrally on a nicely defined data architecture. And assess your change readiness first. Make sure the organization is ready for the speed of change that you can bring with a low-code platform and agile methodologies, and employ an expert if needs be to really get the business to embrace the change rather than resist the change. That's probably one of the biggest barriers to the success of a project, is user adoption.
Yes. Now, actually, that touches very nicely on the final point I want to make. Those who have attended, thank you very much for joining us. As I said, we're going to go to Q&A. We're just doing the summary now for those that need to get away. If when you leave the webinar, we've got a little poll that will open up, which is just to ask about what we could do future webinar subjects on. This is meant to be the first of a series to give value back to the market we serve. And one thing we forgot to put in was change management. So if you think change management, because you've just emphasized it, Dan, should be a webinar topic we cover in future, how to do it well, tips and tricks from our experiences, could you put a 9? Let's go with that. I like odd numbers. Put a 9 in the chat for me, and we'll get that. And then when you do leave, if you can take the 2 minutes to fill out the survey, we really appreciate it. It's utterly anonymous. It's just to help us prioritize which ones we do first. So let me thank Manish and Dan for being the experts so expertly. And I'd like to thank Rebecca for all her excellent work as chat master or mistress. I don't know which one it is. And I'd like to thank all of the attendees. We've had a really fabulous series of questions coming through, and hopefully we've got more to cover. It's always better when you engage. So we really, really appreciate the time you took to fill in the questions. So with that, end of the presentation. Let's move into Q&A. So Rebecca, what have we had coming through?
Sure. So we had a fair few. We actually had a lot of people asking about our practical experience. So the benefits and the pitfalls on projects that we've worked on personally, rather than just abstract concept.
Generically.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, look, some of the benefits and pitfalls. I think one of the things I've seen before working on some of the larger projects we've worked on is really that aspect of change management across such a wide and diverse user base. Quite often when we're coming in to organizations and we're doing things at scale, you're touching a large amount of different areas of the organization, and you've really quite often we come up against some really in-baked ways of working, and we come up against these sort of cultural differences in different parts of the same organization. And then that sort of starts to go beyond IT. It starts to go beyond low code. And really it's that cultural change that you're having to sort of bring about in order to foster adoption. So what do I mean by this? So we worked with clients where they've got people in different parts of the country. And they have a sort of head office in one particular part of the country, but people who work in other parts of the country work in completely different ways, because that may suit the way they need to approach whoever they're serving locally. So you start to get these kind of cultural friction points that come into play, where sort of the head office might dictate, right, from now on we are working like this because we do want to bring around a standard way of working, and there's normally good reasons for that, not least efficiency, but consistency of customer experience, for example. But you get natural resistance from people out in the different regions who don't necessarily work like that and have never worked like that, and are now feeling like they're being sort of dictated to by head office about what they're going to do. And you can start to get a bit of natural pushback from that. And the sort of target for that is typically the new system that's being used to sort of roll out and standardize that change. So that's where we start, that's where you can start to get that sort of users who are less willing to accept it, because it's changing the way they're working. Not because necessarily the system is doing anything wrong or differently or isn't easy to use, for example, but just it's bringing about a fundamental change to the way they're doing something. And that's where you really need to get some professional change management involved to sort of try and break down some of those barriers and say, sort of say to them that there is a really good reason for this. This is why we're bringing about the change. We want to bring you on the journey. We want you to have some influence into how the low-code application is going to be built, and really trying to give them a sense of ownership of what's about to come down their way. If you don't do that, then effectively you're rolling out this massive sort of cultural change and way of working change to people through the use of a system. And one day they're using an old system, doing everything how they used to done for the last 20 years. And then they walk in on a Monday morning and all of a sudden their whole world has changed and is upside down. And if they haven't been properly prepared for that, mentally speaking, you're going to get a lot of pushback. So that's probably one of the areas, and why I get a bit more passionate around the change management is, the system is quite often used to bring about change, but it's a lot wider than just the sort of technical implementation.
A strong case there for change management, I think, being our next webinar. If anybody has been convinced by what Dan has just answered as well, please remember he's a 9 in the chat to make sure that we do pick that one up. Dan, I think that was a very comprehensive answer. Hopefully it's answered the question for the person who asked it. If not, as ever, let Rebecca know. We will come back to it. Rebecca, is there another question?
Yeah, I guess on that basis, we're talking a lot about people and they're walking into a new system. We did have a question. What about existing legacy systems? Are they just completely replaced?
Ooh, I think I'm going to come to both of you for this one, actually. So I'm going to get an answer from both of you for your perspectives.
So, I mean, I think the short answer is no. They don't have to be at all. When it comes to change, especially sort of technical change around that, the low-code platforms that we're working with, they're actually very good at integrating to legacy sources and really bringing information up contextually within a what we call, like, say, a single pane of glass. So you, for example, imagine a dashboard. You're bringing information from 2 or 3 different legacy systems, as well as the low-code platform, as well as some external sources, contextually. So, by bringing all of that out contextually, we can still bubble up information from legacy platforms and legacy applications in a modern way that we can wrap with low code, and we can manipulate that data in different ways, while still potentially writing data back to that legacy platform as well. So whilst generally speaking, we tend to see there is a desire to replace the legacy platforms over time, you don't have to go into a full-scale legacy replacement in order to enable a low-code project. A lot of the time we see low-code wrapping legacy applications to enable innovation, enable a better user experience, enable the business to actually make changes quickly, while still using that legacy system as the core system of record, and using the low-code platform to bring the new features and the new ways of working to the wider business.
Good answer. Manish, is there anything you want to throw on top of that from a slightly more technical perspective to answer to enrich back that question up?
Yeah, so I would say it would probably depend on the use case as well. For example, if your legacy system is really aging and it's becoming difficult to maintain or manage, you may be better off actually looking at replacing it and going ahead in that direction. But as Dan mentioned earlier, it's not always necessary to replace it. If there are benefits in doing that, yes, go ahead and target it. But just because you are embracing a low-code platform, it doesn't mean that you have to get rid of all your legacy systems. Quite often we go into the projects where there's a lot of work which has already been done, and we don't intend to fit in all the shoes. We go ahead with the approach where we say, okay, let's bring in the best of the breed. Let's put modules or applications that make sense for Appian platform or any other low-code platform. And where it is not needed, for example, if the data can be surfaced from wherever it is, then we don't actually need to decommission or kind of get rid of your legacy system. So we can work equally alongside with your applications. But yes, if it is becoming a nuisance and if it is a lot of overhead to maintain it, then you may actually want to be going or heading in that direction.
I think there's a couple of interesting points as well there, especially around wrapping systems. We regularly wrap sort of large ERP systems, things like SAP and things like that. There are certain systems that whilst also they may not be described as legacy, they're core systems, and they're really good at what they do. But it doesn't necessarily mean that you would expose them to a wide range of users. You want a more intuitive interface, for example, to interact with it. You'd want to wrap what they're doing in business process, so that you can really sort of wrap a layer around the core functionality of what these systems are doing to make it easier for users to interact with and seek approvals, etc., without having to train your entire workforce on how to use a particular bespoke application.
Guys, I think that's a very, very comprehensive answer, which is also very clear. You don't have to if you don't want to, but if you want to, it can. Rebecca, any more questions?
We've got one on data. So how flexible is low code to adjust data structure during implementation?
Ooh, Manish, would you be best one for this one?
Sure thing. I can definitely take a stab, and then Dan can, come in and chime in with a few words wherever I might have missed something. So I'll approach it in the way that, yes, when you're talking about the low code platform, it's not low code just programming, but it is low code data as well. So you don't actually sit there creating a database heavy application or designing for an extensive period. Using a low-code platform, you can go either way. You can design your application and push the changes to the database layer without actually even going into the database. So you can have your low-code platform manage those things for you. On the other hand, if you actually want to go data first, because of your reporting requirements and whatnot, you can go ahead and structure your data set, and then you can build application on top of it. Now, to accommodate the changes while you are implementing, quite often this happens. We start with something in our mind, but we end up with something else, because once you go through that iteration cycle, or when you're talking to the business, they say, oh, we may want something else in there. When you're making those changes in a low code platform, uh, how we have been talking about low code platform, it gives you one thing in true sense, which is a speed. And it's not limited just to the build process. It finds its way all the way through build process, changes, maintenance, and all those iterative cycles that we keep on talking about, CI/CD. So maintenance is not a different thing to this as well. If you're looking at making changes, you will probably spend similar amount of time as you would when you're building things. So we are not looking at a very intense uh, process for manipulating the data structure or making those changes reflect on your application.
I think it's fair, cool. I mean, I think we as you say, it happens sort of fairly regularly that as your design will evolve over time, and low makes it a lot easier to do that. I mean, the same gotchas will always be true that, if you're changing a data type, then there can be consequences to that you need to be aware of. But you can still do it very quickly because the amount of code you're having to change is greatly reduced by using a low-code platform. So yeah, you have to be aware of the changes you're making and the impact of those changes. Some changes will be a lot easier to make, and others may be slightly more complex. If like say, if you're changing fundamental data types, it could have a consequence on other areas of the application. But again, what we find with the low-code platforms that we work with is finding where you need to make those changes, and then making those changes is quick and relatively simple.
So we keep talking about speed, and I'm just going to jump in here. What is fast? That was one of the questions. How quick is quick?
So I mean, the metrics I see from people like Gartner, from the low-code vendors themselves, it ranges anywhere between 10 to 17 times quicker than traditional application development. And I think it also kind of flows on a bit further than that, because it's not just the initial build. Manish alluded to it earlier in the webinar that the platforms are constantly being updated with new features. So because it's a platform approach, not only are they adding new ways of doing things. We work with a number of these platforms for 15 years now, and we've seen them evolve over time. And so we're seeing the changes come through. So every quarter we may get new features we can take advantage of, whether that be more artificial intelligence or new UI controls that we can add and make things look even better than they do now. So that's one side of it, but also some of the more fundamental and important side of it as well is because it's a platform approach. They're really taking care of the low-level security. So there've been a few highly publicized security incidents globally of late. The platforms we work with, they were either unaffected by them, or they made very rapid deployment of changes, so that within a very small number of hours of these security threats becoming apparent, we'd already patched all of our customer servers and they were secure. And we didn't have to go in and change anything in the application for that. The customer didn't have to spend any money to do that. The platform providers sort that issue out, roll that out from any of the latest threats and attack vectors that we're seeing evolving on an almost daily basis. So that's quite a big win in terms of.
That's a huge win, actually. Yeah, I remember the number of times I was in a position where I was, right, well, we're doing this project between August and then it just got thrown out the window because the entire team was needed to do an emergency patch. And it was going to take 3 weeks through business plans into absolute chaos.
And we've seen that recently. Yeah, we've seen that recently with IT departments of customers we're working with. It's like, okay, we need to integrate to this system. Can you make it available? No, we're busy dealing with this security issue that's come up, global security issue around Log4j, for example. We're having to look through all of our in-house systems. We're having to do all these scans. We have to remediate stuff. Don't talk to us for a month. And we're sitting there going, well, the issue came out at 12 o'clock last night. It's now 7 o'clock in the morning. We're all patched and done. And we didn't have to do anything. We just rock up to work and it's taken care of for us. So that significantly helps to reduce maintenance costs from that point of view. And it also is a lot less likely to sort of derail your implementation because a lot of those things are taken care of automatically.
I tell you what, Dan, I regret someone not asking that question earlier because I think that should have been one of the core benefits that we talked about at the start. But there's so many with low code. It's impossible
there are
to fit
a
them
lot.
all in, isn't it? Yeah, there are a lot.
Yeah.
We did actually have a question on security, so you've just answered it.
Yeah. Perfect,
yeah, I
yes.
mean, I'll caveat that as well. I mean, obviously, when you're building applications, you've got a responsibility for security as well. Quite often within that application, you're designing in a way that, for example, has role-based access. You still got a responsibility to say, right, people in this role should be able to see that part of the application or interact with this part of the application. So that responsibility is on you. But the really deeply technical stuff, there's a threat for Log4j, which is a commonly used sort of low-level piece of logging software that's open source. You don't have to worry about all of that, and that's where the real work and effort goes. And because of those threats constantly evolving, you kind of never sleep. Whereas once you've got your role-based access sorted within your application, you've tested it, you're good to go. You're not going to have to touch that again.
Yeah,
just one more question come in, if you don't mind me interrupting you there.
Absolutely. We've got time for one more, actually. I was just about to say, so let's go for it.
Does low code do low code integration interfaces? Well, that was a tongue twister.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. It is sort of a lot of the time we have out the box connectors to other systems, which are no code. We literally just go and say, right, you can go and find the system over here. These are the credentials or security certificates or the various different types of authentication to be able to access that. And the low-code platform support many different types of ways of authenticating with those platforms. And you plug it in and then you're drag dropping it into your process to, for example, I don't know, push a document to SharePoint or read some information from an external data provider. So there are a number of no-code connectors out to external systems. But even where that's not the case, the facilities that low-code has make it very quick and easy to integrate into external systems with a minimal amount of code and configuration.
I think that's a very good comprehensive answer for us to end on. Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you, Rebecca. Thank you, all of our attendees. I see, especially the one around security really hit a mark. Someone said, "Where do I sign?" So I think we've all known the pain of security patches.
Yeah.
So yeah, definitely should have brought that one forward. And if we had enough interest, I think that we'll do something around data and reporting, and I'm sure that will be a big part of it as well.
Yeah.
And I think security, Rebecca, I don't know, that's one of the options on the survey at the end, but I think security should be something that we also look at as a future webinar when it comes to low code. All right, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for attending and thank you so much for sticking around with us, the golden few at the end. We are going to end now. And if you have any more questions, Dan, Manish are both available on LinkedIn. Feel free to contact them there. And otherwise, have a wonderful rest of the day. Cheerio.
Thanks, Pete.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Guys, I will catch up with all of you at the catch-up session in a few hours.
All right.
Have some sleep.
All right. See you then.
Yeah,
Cheers.
bye.
Bye.